Welcome to the Cowboy Office Show, where you'll experience expert analysis and epic discussion on key pillars of the equine industry, including sports, business, hobby, and the horse lifestyle. Your co-hosts are Jody Brainerd and Brian Dykert, industry veterans with over 120 years combined living the cowboy lifestyle. The Cowboy Office Show will help you get involved, ask more questions, and create change. We'll keep riding for you as together we learn from the ride already ridden, learn to listen better to our horse, and make our industry better for all. Each episode will take a ride around the industry in less time than you can load the truck and trailer. Drop your email at cowboyoffice.com to receive updates and never miss an episode. Saddle up as we ride into today's show.
Hello, horse world. As Winston Churchill famously said, there's something about the outside of a horse that's good for the inside of a man. So true. The social license to operate's a big topic and very important to all of us. Do we become more responsible and control our own destiny, or do we succumb to the administrators as society may regulate us? In this show, we will explore a few of the lessons to be learned from the racehorse industry. We have with us today an author, a horse owner, managing partner to Royal Victory Thoroughbreds, a racing stable partnership, and a lifelong horse enthusiast that has a very unique perspective on the modern racehorse world and the role horses play in our lives. Go to cowboyoffice.com, put your email in, join us on our ride. Make sure to hit the subscribe button on the platform of your choice. I'm Brian.
And I'm Jody. We want to welcome today Victor Bahna, originally a New Yorker from Long Island, and now a tech software career expert that lives in Washington. He's the author of Heliacal Star, the novel horse racing thriller. It's a great read. I just finished with it, and what an outstanding story. Most of us in the modern horse show world can completely relate to this. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you for having me on your show today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your comments about the book. That's really rewarding to hear your feedback. So love to hear that stuff.
Well, it is a dynamic story, and so we certainly encourage everybody to get it. We'll give you all the details in a minute, but it is a great read. There's many parallels between the racehorse industry and the modern advanced horse show industry. Change the names and the venues, as we all may have somewhat similar stories. Competition will induce changed human behavior, there's no doubt. Gambling is gambling, and now the U.S. is bringing sports betting to a more modern, universal level. Horse racing and wagering has been around as long as we've been riding horses. The wagering at tracks and handicapping racing has been a foundation principle to the purses offered at racetracks, which has been a major economic driver to the entire industry of horse racing. We'll come back to this. Let's start, after a lifetime of being around the racehorse industry, from the outside and the periphery. What was it like when you became a horse owner for the first time in 2005 and then go on to manage a partnership in the active horse racing industry called Royal Victory Thoroughbreds?
Yeah, so I grew up here, as you mentioned, in New York on Long Island, not too far from Belmont Racetrack, which is known for the Belmont Stakes every year as part of the Triple Crown. For me, being a spectator for all those years, I never really thought that I'd end up in a position where I could own a racehorse and be part of affect that business or industry. So the first time I claimed a horse at a racetrack, which was in Washington State, it was intoxicating, actually. It was a dream come true. I'm like, wow, I feel like, I'm in a new world here. But it really just was the beginning for me with regard to just learning that it's a lot more than just a horse running on a track. There's a whole ecosystem that's supporting the horses, the industry, the venue, the facility, everything that goes with it. The next 20 years effectively have become a journey for me and in learning a lot about what's happening, both good and bad, in terms of the racing business.
So your first purchase was claiming a horse in a race. That
was my first purchase. Yeah.
That's a pretty bold move. That's more than going to the horse sale.
Yeah. Eventually I got to the horse sale, but yeah, the first one was a claiming horse. As the racing business goes, claiming has a little bit less downside and less upside. It's a little bit of a safer play, actually, with regard to what you're buying, because the horse is already raced and you kind of have a sense of what their performances are on the racetrack. Of course, I claimed a maiden that was unproven, and perhaps a bit more riskier in that sense. But yeah, it was a modest claim, and it was a great introduction for me because I got to then see what was happening behind the scenes, so to speak. And from there, it just became, almost like a love affair between myself and the horses, leading to eventually this partnership, which I have to share the passion and the excitement of being an owner. That's why I'm doing it. It's not necessarily for, anything financial or anything like that.
That's really interesting. Victor, did you have a trainer spotted before you made your claim? I mean,
I
obviously
did.
you had to have a plan, right?
Yeah. So you have certain rules you have to have in place. You have to have a trainer. You have to have the money in the account, and you have to fill out the form exactly correctly, or they're going to avoid the claim. And in this case, I had gone to an owner seminar at the racetrack a couple of months earlier, and then started talking to one of the local trainers who he's actually one of my trainers still today. So I was very fortunate to associate with him back then. And he was terrific in terms of just kind of showing me the ropes a little bit, taking me, even before I claimed the horse, he was taking me on the golf cart around the backstretch and kind of giving me some advice and pointers. And together, he advised me on which horse to claim as well.
And this was all in Washington, not on Long Island.
Yes, this is up in Emerald Downs at Washington State. Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. So just briefly, tell me a little bit about this, because we don't know it. I mean, we've syndicated performance horses, stallions. There's been partnerships, but with the race horses, and I believe, you correct me if I'm wrong, because I told you that I had some history with Lucas, and I believe that Seize the Gray is owned by multiple owners. Is that not correct? Because I remember Lucas on T saying we're going to have 400 owners in the box here to get a picture taken when he won a race. But so tell me a little bit about the partnership thing, a little bit about that partnership thing and how that works. Who manages? Because there's a lot of people involved.
Yeah. So my partnership's much more modest. The one that Lucas is involved with Seize the Gray would be myracehorse.com, and that's more of a internet campaign almost. It's one of those, they have, I think it's hundreds if not 1,000 owners for those, and they pay a modest amount, and then they get certain access to information about the horse and stable tours and that sort of thing. But what I do is a little bit more of a niche type of partnership. I offer 10% shares in each of the racehorses that I own, and partners can opt in or they could decide not to opt in. So what happens is when the horse is about ready to race, I'll make the offer to the partners, and then they decide whether they opt in or not. And some of the horses will have a high percentage of partners, and some will have a very low percentage depending on what they want to do. And I'm not trying to put pressure on anybody to own or not own. So I'll provide them with information with regard to the pedigree, where the horse is going to race, because the rates will be a little bit different depending on where they are. And with my partnership, since it's pretty tight and it's not a very big partnership, I do all of the management. I work with all the trainers and provide all the updates. I also am not charging any overhead, because my goal with the partnership is to really just introduce people into the sport, give them an opportunity to taste the champagne of victory and to feel the gut-wrenching, spoils of defeat, I suppose.
Agony of defeat.
The agony, yeah.
Right?
I mean, we all need to feel that, and at that point, they could decide if that's something that they want to do, more on their own, or if they want to kind of stick with the partnership. So everything I do is based on that.
Okay.
Well, tell me, partners, are you seeing more new people come and play on the ownership side of horse racing versus in the past? Finding new partners, is that an easy thing or a hard thing?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's hard. It's hard to find new partners. And part of it is on my end, because I want to be pretty selective in terms of who I want to partner with. I don't necessarily want to open it up to everybody, because we're dealing with pretty sensitive stuff. There's money involved, and there's tax forms that have to be filled out. And I just want to make sure that, who I'm working with or partnering with are folks that I want to be partnered with. So I could be a bit more selective. I think my racehorse has done a lot of that, actually. You mentioned Seize the Gray. We're seeing a lot more of those myracehorse.com horses come out, and that's super affordable because it's only a few $100s. I think it's like $280, and then you don't pay anything else after that. So you get to be, it's not quite the same, in my opinion, as completely owning the horse, because you're not going to make the decisions on who the trainer is, and you're not going to be consulting necessarily with the trainer on a regular basis. But it does give you sort of a taste and a flavor, and it does create a little bit more interest. And it is kind of, I think it's kind of cool when you see a couple hundred people crowding a winner's circle for a race.
Right.
As long as they're not racing against me, that's all.
And then if the horse does really well financially, does it pay dividends?
If the horse does really well, it will pay dividends. Yeah, you can do that. I tell people not to expect to make money.
Right.
You know, if you're doing this as an investment, there are way better places to invest your money.
Right.
But if you want to scream and yell at a racetrack or at a streaming race on the internet, you're going to get a lot of excitement, and I think you're going to get a lot of value for your money, because think about how much money you spend if you're going to a sporting event. If you go into a football game or a hockey game or something like that, I mean, it's a lot of money you're dropping. And if you got season tickets, it's even more. So I look at it this way, you know, it's an investment in entertainment, and it gives you an insider view of what's really happening inside a pretty interesting industry too.
Really? Well, cool. We had a little discussion about this earlier when we were setting up for the show. The horse bond thing is super important. I think all of us that decide we're going to make a career out of this, we have to feel that bond. And, you know, we're the animal rights activists, and so much of that stuff goes on, which is part of the issue that we have with the race business and with the horse business in general. But people think that horses are like pets. And I try to explain to people they're not. I mean, they're horses. They're special. That bond is special that we have with them. They're a working animal. People think that we force horses to run. And I said, horses love to run. That's what makes this sport so great, is because the jockey has something underneath him that has so much heart and courage. And I mean, pressed to try to win a race. You've seen those close races, and it's like, that's what drives it. And when I watch it, it's like, I was fortunate to be able to see Secretariat because I'm old enough to have known what a terrible, boring racehorse. You know what I mean? It was like, there's no heart involved there at all. I mean, it's just go beat you by 30 lengths and leave, right? I mean, holy cow. But anyway, when you were young, you had to feel this passion. So when did you first think, you know what, I love a horse? Where did that come from?
Probably the first time I was at the racetrack. Yeah, just the excitement of being there, and like you mentioned, just the thrills that we were and just hearing the sound of them just running towards the finish line. Back then, we weren't on TVs as much as we are now, and I would run to the rail and I'd hear the races and just watch them, and the grace and the strength and just the competition itself was super exciting to me. So that drew me in initially in terms of just watching these athletes perform on the racetrack. And then I actually took a college course that was teaching me some horsemanship, and that was for a year in college. That was really enlightening too, because then I got to actually work with a horse and ride a horse and get to learn a little bit more about, you know, what it is to partner with a horse. And so that stayed with me, even though I moved out to Washington and didn't ride a horse for probably 25 years. Once I had the opportunity to do it again, I was just like, sign me up. I'm all in. So.
Tell me where you took that course. Was that back in New York?
It was, yeah. I was at my college, State University at Stony Brook. I don't know if they still have the course or not, but it was it was out on Eastern Long Island.
Yeah, one of the SUNY schools.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I went to Canton, and there's some even Morrisville, because they had a standardbred racing program at Morrisville, which is a SUNY school.
Okay.
So it was just interesting.
Campus, but it was a local farm that was near Stony Brook campus.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a parent involved when you were young that took you to the racetrack, or did you just got your driver's license and said, I'm going to go watch a horse race? Or?
I did not have parents that took me to the racetrack. That was something that they did not know about until later on.
Okay. So that was some of those days you played hooky. Some of your buddies, you guys went to the track, right?
Yeah, we would say, I think school's over for now. Let's find a, and then we didn't have driver's licenses yet. And in fact, we weren't even legal to be gambling on the races, but we found a bus that took us really close to the front gates. And we found willing participants that would place our bets for us,
sure.
For an extra $2 or $3.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's a great story though. But I mean, I think probably that's what's missing today with the race business, because so much of it now, you yourself have said that you pull up simulcast. It's you turn on TV and you miss that. It's not the same. I mean, you can be passionate about a horse race, but it's not the same until you're there and, you bet on a horse or you own part of one, and this thing breaks. And, I love the quarter horse racing too. I mean, it happens very, very fast, but it's like, it's the same thing. You know what I mean? That passion is just like the thoroughbred.
It's the sounds, it's the smells, it's the sights, it's having that voucher in your hand actually, instead of, just everything on your phone. And yeah, there's a lot of excitement that goes into that. And you do lose a lot of that when you're not physically there. So I actually especially like going to the racetrack in the mornings when they're doing training, because it's organized chaos effectively on the backstretch with horses coming and going and on and off the track, and they're going in different directions, but it's all very structured in its own way. And you get a lot more personality actually from not just the people back there, but also from the horses themselves. You really get to see them when they're not necessarily all kind of jacked up for a race.
We have the same thing. It's called a warm-up arena. It's the same thing, just not a track. It's organized chaos. And so, yes, and there is a lot going on and a lot to learn, and there's a lot of fun there too. So yes,
it is. I really enjoy that. A cup of coffee and a bunch of horses, and you can just really get an appreciation for all the hard work that goes back there too, because it's a lot of work to keep a barn running.
And the hours that go into it, my goodness. I mean, way before daylight, and it's really, really hard work. Well, that's a great background. I love the story. You had to get on a bus and sneak to the track. They're not letting mom and dad know about that one, right? Woo!
Yeah, we would catch the last 3 races of the day if we did that, and they were racing basically every day but Tuesday. So it was pretty much 4-day-a-week thing that we could do.
Yeah, the track is so fun, and because I laugh at this because I'm thinking back when I worked at Los Alamitos a bazillion years ago, and we would always have the Lucas stable, those guys, we'd have, half dozen of us, we'd pool money and we'd have a show bet, right? I mean, because we could always pick a horse that's going to run on the top 3. I mean, we would do that. We'd pool our money. We'd go bet the $50 window, and then we would, split it up at the end of the night. We were very successful, but we're here guys that are working on the track, in the barns, know the trainers, know the horses. And this just shows you what a great equalizer horse racing is, because we'd be upstairs and down at the bottom, some lady would bet her cousin's 2nd birthday on a long shot. It would be a 40-1 and win $2,000 on a $2 exacta ticket. It's like, you got to be kidding me, right?
Yeah.
You possibly do that, right? But it happens. So yeah, anybody, you can have a great education, be the best handicapper in the world, and you can look really dumb.
It does happen. Yes.
Yep.
It definitely happens. Yeah.
So fun stuff.
I've been a victim of that myself multiple times.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, haven't we all? And I think that the sports betting modernizing in today's society and where it all goes, Jody and I and a lot of our colleagues talk about this a lot, because can our disciplines offer some of that? Jody's a huge advocate on the fact that the horse is the equalizer. And no matter how good the half of the partnership, you got to put them together. And not only do you have to put them together, then you've got to be able to repeat it. How many races you go to, how many competitions we go to, when you got to have horse and rider step up to the plate now is when it's got to happen. And so there's common denominators in there. The betting component, I think, is very interesting. And I only say it because from where Jody and I come from, building purses is one of our last quests as an industry, is having revenue sources. The racehorse industry, I don't care if you're talking about quarter horses, thoroughbreds, or standardbreds, they've always had that pari-mutuel piece, which is coming from the bulk fan group that's doing wagering, because a percentage of that stays back to the track, and that's where the track builds those purses to offer up to get the horses, and away you go. In our world, couldn't there be some, I don't know if it's a modernized version of that or not, I'm not sure, but when we talk about sports betting, I think that's all very interesting. But betting, just like competition, will alter human behavior. That's the baseball saga that they all got into years ago. And so we've all got to be responsible along the way. I want to get to your book. So, Victor, talk real quick about your book, Heliacal Star. It's a great, thrilling story. It's absolutely phenomenal. I could have just changed the names and the venues, and Jody and I could have told our own stories.
Right.
I found it absolutely fascinating, but talk about it. The big question is, why write it and why a novel?
Yeah. So I hadn't written a book prior to this, and I just had a light bulb moment one day where I thought to myself, I think I want to write a story, and I want to tell the story about a horse, and I want to show that story in terms of what happens to a horse that you could literally spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars for at an auction. What potentially might happen to that horse over the course of his career, and potentially after his career is over? Like, what are some of the potential scenarios that we could run into? And often in racing, we talk a lot about what's happening in the sales, the auctions, and the amount of money that's being spent. And we spend a lot of time with the big races, whether it's the Triple Crown or the Breeders' Cup or just racing in general. But we don't really have that conversation as much in terms of when they're done with the racing. If they get injured or if they're just not very good and can't compete, or they just get older and they don't have what they used to. And so I wanted to tell that story and wrap it in an interesting tale that people would find something that they'd want to keep reading and not want to put down. And that's sort of where it all came from. Being a breeder and an owner myself, I also have a lot of passion for the sport and have a lot of care for these horses, and I also wanted to express that as well as part of this. But of course, racing could also provide a pretty interesting backdrop, and so we've got our nefarious bad guys, of course, and they're trying to do things that may or may not happen in real life. I think it's reasonably believable that you could see these things potentially happening in a real world scenario, although it is fiction. Right. And our main character actually has this background where he had worked for the organized crime family for a while, left on pretty rough terms, and he finds himself in a situation where he's overhearing a conversation at the barn one day, and he recognizes one of the voices as one of these mobsters from his past. And that's not someone that he ever wanted to run into again or ever see again. But what he's saying is so disturbing that our main character has to make a decision with regard to does he report what he sees and risk the potential of running into these bad guys again and potentially putting his life at risk, or does he just let bygones be bygones and not do anything? And of course he's going to do the right thing, and after some internal consternation, and then the story sort of takes off from there.
Right.
Yeah, well, I thought it's a neat story to be. I thought the story was great. The book is great. The fact that you just basically come in off the street and say, you know what, I think I'm going to write a book. And you made it work. That's what I'm like, it's like, really? I mean, yeah. Well, I've never wrote a book before. I think I'll just write one. It's like, holy cow.
And I'll say that it took about 7 years from start to finish. And the first draft of the book would be not worth probably reading the first 5 pages. So there's a lot of iteration. There was a lot of editing on my part, and there was a lot more that as I continued to write it. One of the interesting things, having not written before in terms of a novel, was I wasn't really quite sure how it was going to end. Even while I was writing it, it was more of those, let's just kind of keep the story going and let's go here and let's go there. And it wasn't until I got to the ending that I actually had the ending. So it's not something that I had this foresighted ahead of time thinking, okay, this is how the book is going to end. It just sort of came together. And I think that actually makes hindsight I'm glad I did that, because I think it makes the ending less predictable for the reader. Most of the folks that have come back and read the book have said that they couldn't necessarily, they weren't quite sure exactly where it was going to go. And so keeping them on edge was kind of nice to do as far as keeping the story going.
You did. And you did it well. Really? You got my attention at the beginning, and I stuck right through it. So, because you got me.
Excellent.
Sure.
Excellent. That's great.
Victor, I asked you this question before, and you've had a little time to think about it now, but, you tell a story, and it's a great story. But, there are parts of this thing that are absolutely, it tells you about the race business. Is there parts of this book that you would like people to understand? Parts of the story that you wrote, what's important to you to get a message to get across to the people that are going to buy and read the book?
My message to the people would be, first and foremost, that not everything you read in the media is going to be reality. I think we get a distorted view of the world from the lens of certain outlets and mainstream media, let's just say. And I know they're doing it because they want to get ratings or attention or clicks, whatever. The real world is a lot different than what we often see. There's just a lot happening, as I mentioned, to get a horse ready for racing and to care and feed and train and so forth. And I wanted people to understand that most of the people that are on the backstretch are, in fact, really passionate about caring for the horse and putting the welfare of the horse first. So that would be probably the first. The second point is, again, kind of looking at what happens to the horses after they finish racing. There are loopholes, and there are some scenarios where a horse can end up in a pretty bad spot. And even though it's not as bad as it used to be, there's still going to be bad actors out there, and they're going to try to exploit the system and potentially good people. And so we've got to just be really, keep our eyes open and be diligent about those things and continue to weed out those bad actors so that we can get back to having a more favorable view of what we're doing from a mainstream perspective. I think generally speaking, bringing people that may not necessarily be involved in racing and putting them in the moment in terms of, before the race, during the race, after the race, and having them kind of go through some of the same emotions that we go through, as owners or spectators. I think that was also important too, is giving that ability to relate to an environment they might not know as much about, and maybe getting them excited, and hopefully they'll show up at a racetrack one day and feel it live like we have.
Really cool. I mean, that's interesting. I thought it was really a good part of the book when you're talking about those horses when careers are finished. And it's not just the racehorse business. The performance horse business is the same way. We've got stallions, you've got your mares. If they're money earners, they're going to have foals and yada, yada, yada. It's like I look out my window and I have a 22-year-old gelding and probably a 26-year-old mare that are standing out there that have been great show horses, made me a lot of money over the years, and they'll die here. But it's not like it's costing 35 cents a day like you're feeding your dog.
Yep.
To watch those guys out there. So it's an issue. It is.
Yeah. It's expensive. It's wherever you are, caring for a 1,200-pound animal is going to be expensive, and they're going to need space. They're going to need feed. They're going to need vet care. They're going to need shoeing. It's not something for the faint of heart. If you're on a thin budget and you're watching pennies, you're going to have to make a commitment to caring for the horse. And that's probably the biggest threat that exists today is, people just don't necessarily understand when they get into it that, hey, it's really exciting to own a racehorse, and maybe you get some payback and dividends. And I've had a few that have definitely done that. But when their career is over, you still have a responsibility to take care of that horse. And, whether it's rehoming them or finding them a second career or doing it yourself, that sometimes is a reality that people don't really appreciate until they're in that reality, and then all of a sudden they're like, whoa, this is a lot of money, and I don't know if I want to pay for that anymore. And so that to me is the biggest challenge that we face in terms of the aftercare of horses. And quite frankly, it could be pretty convenient to just say, hey, let me send them to an ag auction, let the highest bidder take them. And sometimes that bidder is someone that's got other plans in terms of what they're going to do with that horse, put them on a trailer and send them up to Canada or down to Mexico. And next thing you know, they're in the food chain. So that's just something that people just, I think, need to be aware of when they're getting involved with horses and make that commitment up front if they can. And if they can't, by the way, there are charities, there are foundations, there are places you can go. Don't just panic and say, I need to, just sell it in an ag auction. Find someone that, because you'll find there are always going to be people that are going to try to help you if you are in a situation like that, from what I've seen.
True. Yeah. All of the things that happen to us in life. So it's not only those. Do we all are things devastating to us in life, and therefore our commitments and activities in other ways get changed? The answer is yes. I would tell you the American Horse Council has a very active program called the Unwanted Horse Coalition. And I know the racehorse industry is very active on the Horse Council level as well. That's one of those on a national program. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, Victor. Are there alternatives by which we can ensure that our horses have the end of life that a horse is supposed to have yes. And I hear you, because I don't think there's no part of the modern horse world that's immune to that component. So, what does that look like? I don't think anybody has that answer, but I know that there are lots and lots of resources available. So people that may find themselves in that scenario, including economic hardship where they can't, it's the choice of putting food in your own mouth or trying to feed your horse, then reach out and get some help. Right.
Yeah. And that's true. I mean, even in the book, one of the characters just finds himself in a position where he's at a point where he doesn't know necessarily what to do. And so he gets hooked up. He put himself in a bad place, and then he gets hooked up with some bad people. And then next thing you know, he's compromised and he's got to do bad things. And it doesn't necessarily mean, he's a terrible person, but it does mean that, he feels like he's kind of backed into a corner. So, but the awareness, I think there's a lot more of those services and foundations today than there have been in the past. It's really encouraging to see the awareness as well. And in the thoroughbred industry in particular, we're just seeing a lot more awareness, whether it's racetracks promoting it or some of the more recognized owners doing the same. I think we're moving in the right direction from that perspective.
I hope so, because one of Jody's and my bigger push is getting the horse world exposed to more of the public for the goodness of what horses do to people and people should be doing with horses. And fundamentally, there's nothing but greatness in there. And the bulk of people are good and the bulk of horses are good. And yes, you have to sort through them. And yes, there are bad horses that want to hurt you. And so there are ways that you have to take that's no different than having an aggressive bad dog. We all know all of those stories. It just takes the responsibility. I want to talk for a minute about the parallels. And while your book tells this fascinating story and goes into some of the deep, darker sides of society and brings it up through the racehorse industry, there are a lot of parallels to our side of the world as well. But let's talk about for a minute the social license to operate in social media. You made a statement a minute ago about the power of social media, and they drive the negative to get the clicks. I would tell us that we as a country and a society just lived through one of those tales, because while the national politics and all of the hoopla was saying one thing, the society said different. So that's fundamentally true. I'm not trying to go political, but the point of the story is there's a huge disconnect between just publishing social media stuff versus truth and reality. Is that not true? And so then comes, how do we, and it's part of what this show, Cowboy Office, is what we do, is try to publish and provide factual information that educates a consumer, and then let them make their mind up accordingly. We're not trying to take them one way or the other. Jody and I do it a lot in the competitive side because our officiating has a large piece of that. And in our world, the officiating is a large component to the outcome of competition. But where I went with all of that was, how do we use social media to tell the positive side of the story and not allow the mass to just be barking about the negative for the clicks?
Yeah, it's a hard question. The silent majority that you referenced, I would say, is pretty revealing, because it does show us that what people are really thinking might not be what people are saying out loud. And that could very well be the case with regard to our business as well. I think encouraging people to really get the facts and do your research. Don't just believe somebody because they're giving you a report, or understand more context behind what they're saying. And it's not to say that we can't stand improvement. I think every industry and, element of society can stand some improvement somewhere, but it means that, again, the intent here is overwhelmingly positive and good for the horse. So we just have to figure out ways in which we can socialize that a lot more. And maybe it is through social media, maybe it is just through time will prevail, in the sense that the real story will eventually come out. It is a really hard one, because we're drawn to the car crashes and to the sensational, news story or who's fighting with who. And it just kind of draws our attention when we've got an 8-second attention span. So it's a hard one, I think, and I'm not sure I know what the answers are. The more exposure and the more, we can introduce people to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis and do it in a way that might be entertaining, that might be a solution here. But I wish it was easy, but I don't know the simple answer to that question.
Well, I don't think anybody knows, but society wants to talk about social media on the good and the bad. And a lot of times they're talking about because everybody's just making noise. But hang on, I'm not trying to go political, but I found this fascinating because during the national federal campaign for president in this country just recently, the podcast episode that had one-on-one conversations with candidates got more, so the analysis says, had more validity, had more truth and context to it, and provided higher value to the consumer because they were watching it in first person and not just being told the storybook list and whatever that was. So that is a huge change in a short period of time of how the consumer gets educated. I use that as a parallel because that's somewhat of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I think that's great, actually, because and the thing I think that's most interesting about what you just said is those podcasts were not 10-second podcasts. They were long and people paid attention to them. And so maybe the attention span is starting to go back in the other direction, which I think would be a good thing for all of us.
It's a difference in the consumption of information. And I think, will the consumer slow down and consume what they have interest in, and then they can ensure that their time is going to be worthwhile? I think that's what somebody like Joe Rogan has brought to the table in the podcast level. 30 million people viewed that within 48 hours. And politically, you're talking about Joe Rogan as a host is politically, to my understanding, a little bit more left of center as opposed to a Trump that was a little bit more right of center. So it's not like they're trying to line the stars. I think what Joe Rogan has done, and they all say this, is he's a fantastic conversationalist. He asks the questions and he just lets it go. And so then the consumer can get it in first person. I think in our case, especially in the horse world, it's things like this. How do we continue to provide valid, good information so that the consumer can rely on the fact that that information is fundamentally true, which is coming from first-person resource as opposed to second and third. That's the piece. And I think the media is absolutely changing because we used to have to rely on advertising ourselves. We had to advertise on the radio, on TV, in the newspaper, on the billboards. We don't have to do that anymore.
I would say, the other thing I would say is what you're doing here, I think is exactly right because it's authentic. And I think people are really looking for authenticity. They're seeing a lot of this peripheral sort of headline type stuff, but it's not very meaningful. And we're starting to crave a little bit more of that authenticity. And I think, that's what the podcast you're referencing. I think that's what people probably saw a lot more of was, hey, it's not just this blast of advertisement. This is actually an authentic conversation that's taking place. I'm going to pay a little bit more attention here because I'm hearing firsthand from, the individuals that I'm interested in. And I think that to me would be a really positive trend if that's what's happening, because I think that's our best weapon here is being authentic. We don't have to put on a facade because it's not necessary.
Tell us what HISA. I want to talk about HISA for a minute, which is the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. It was enacted by the U.S. Congress in 2022. It went into effect last year in May of 2023. And it's a private authority under the regulations of the Federal Trade Commission. And its mission, I don't want to misquote it. I have followed, Jody and I have, because we just have interest, blah, blah, blah. But the industry evolution of horse racing in today's time and the things that they're going through, the rough waters, and the lessons they're learning and the actions that they're taking. HISA is one of those. It's come out of those rough waters that the industry's gone through. Talk to us for a minute, especially being an active partner. What does it mean? Is it working? It's still early, but is it good for everybody? Is it good for the industry? Talk about that.
Yeah, on a couple different levels, I'll kind of reference this. I would say that its intent is good. That we're intending to protect the horses and hopefully provide some level of consistency across different jurisdictions. So I think from an intent perspective, it's in the right place. In terms of the execution of it, that's where you start to get into some interesting spaces. And the biggest challenge I think we have with HISA is that you have a lot of administrators that not necessarily are equine backgrounds, or they are a little bit more bureaucratic in nature, let's just say, even if they have some background. And so there's a lot of administration that's going into this. And we're asking our trainers and we're asking our vets to provide a lot more paper trails, and a lot more work has to go in terms of just basic things that we would just do. Like, for example, you have to get a vet now to sign off before a horse breezes. And that wasn't something that you would have to do before. You would just say, the trainer has good knowledge of what horses are ready to breeze or not. And they feel like it needs a vet check, they'll get a vet check. I don't think that was necessarily problematic before, but the regulators come in and say, no, we're not going to let you breeze unless we have a vet sign off on that. So not only do you have to get it signed off, it's got to have the paperwork. And if you miss the paperwork, or you lose the paperwork, or you forget to file the paperwork, and then all of a sudden you've got a bunch of regulators coming after you, even if you did all the right things. So that part of it is a bit challenging, I would say, for everybody involved. And then you've got rules and stuff that they're applying. And again, it's kind of like, does that really make sense or not? Is it a safety issue, or is this a performance enhancer? Is adding Lasix to a horse really going to put the horse in danger, or is it going to actually prevent the horse from bleeding, and therefore it's a safety issue for them? And so those are the kind of things that still need to get sorted out to a large extent, and the wheels of government don't necessarily move very fast. And so it's been a bit challenging, I think, for the racing industry, and it's been a hard adjustment for a lot of people. And hopefully we'll get to some middle point. It's not quite as bureaucratic or as administrative as it is, but for now, I think we're just dealing with it as is.
Right. And as an industry as a whole, I mean, what do you hear from your colleagues? Is it a similar sentiment? Is that kind of the way most of them feel?
I think most of the trainers are probably not very happy about it. I think they feel like it's a little bit more big brother looking over their shoulders, and they've been doing this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and they wouldn't be in it still if they weren't doing a good job, both from a safety and from a performance perspective. They're not administrators, they're not necessarily the best in terms of crossing every T and dotting every I. And so it's definitely a lot more work. They might even have to hire some people to help with some of the bookkeeping and some of the administration. So I don't think the trainers are very happy about it. Other owners, I don't know if other owners are that opinionated. The folks that are the spectators or the handicappers or the gamblers, not quite sure where they stand on it. I think just more consistency across racetracks is probably a good thing. So you can't have a horse shipping from one jurisdiction to another where the rules are going to be different necessarily, especially when it comes to medications. I think overall, I think it's probably not something that's been completely well received.
Right. Which is an example. And so it'll be interesting to see as far as a case study, because that's one where everybody wants help. And it's the first step in how do we help from a larger level. And then you got to fine tune it on your way through.
Yeah.
And that was my whole point from the beginning about being more responsible. None of us are perfect. We've all got flaws, and competition will push us to do compromise things. That's a known thing in behavior.
I think we could have avoided the regulation if the different jurisdictions were able to get on the same page. Like if there was a national commissioner, for example, that set the rules for the industry, and they were to say, regardless of where you're racing, whether it's Pennsylvania, New York, California, Florida, it doesn't matter. These are going to be the rules that apply. And you may not like it, but we're going to make it uniform. And you can, there's a process in which you can amend or change or request. That never happened from what I could tell. And I'm not even sure how much it was attempted. Everyone kind of clung to their own spaces. And I think that's really when the government stepped in and they were like, if you're not going to do it, we're going to do it for you. And that's kind of where we are today.
Yeah, which brings us back to that social license to operate, which is a common theme. But as the public becomes more aware of everything around them, that's what it means. And our pursuit to bring the goodness of horses to more people, with it comes the responsibility of all of the things that we're kind of talking about. Jody, did you have something you wanted?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm finding the conversation very, very interesting. I was sitting back here listening to you guys, and it's really good. And Brian and I have had this discussion, Victor, many times, but, sooner or later, the bottom line is always money, right? It always comes down to money. And as long as that Kentucky Derby, which is, if you ask somebody off the street, what's the thoroughbred, they'll say the Kentucky Derby. I mean, that they want to watch the girls in their outfits, and they want to go, that's what they want to see, and that's what they see. And as long as that race is on television, we had this conversation that it's the second largest televised event next to the Super Bowl. I can't even imagine how much money that race is worth. And I don't know who actually makes the money, if it's Churchill Downs or I don't know who signs the TV contracts. I don't know. Doesn't matter. But as long as that is there and the neat thing about racing, it's a little bit different than with our reining horses or with our cutters, because it's easy to see who wins, the fastest one. And with us, these judged events where who spins best, who stops best, who works the cow best, that's a selective opinion from an official. But the thing that crosses the finish line first is the winner. And that is as simple as hell, which makes it very, very popular for people to want to watch. So I think as long as that horse race or the Belmont, the Preakness, those races, those high-profile races, as long as the message can get across from those major events, as long as the trickle-down works in a positive way for the whole thoroughbred industry, it's positive. But if it doesn't, then maybe those guys need to be put on board, because if you don't have a horse race, you're not going to have a Kentucky Derby. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that huge amounts of money will affect lots of different things.
Yep, money has a funny way of doing that, doesn't it now? And there's a lot of money in the thoroughbred business for sure, whether it's the auctions at Keeneland or it's the big races like Breeders' Cup or Triple Crown. Yeah.
And worldwide too, not just here, but around the world. Right?
That's right. You got Ascot in England. You've got the big races in France. You've got Dubai, who's got the Dubai World Cup. Japan has got some big racing. So yeah, it's an international sport for sure.
Yeah, the sport of kings. It's built itself as that way for my lifetime.
Yeah. Top stud is going to be $250,000 just for one season, and they breed 100 plus mares. So you could do the math. It adds up pretty quickly.
Wow. Yeah. Incredible.
Tell us, what's your take on the internet? Is it a pro or a con, simulcasting, streaming, internet broadcasting? Because horse racing, you guys have had wagering forever, and you had simulcasting for a long time, way before the internet even got strong. Off-track betting places, they were just corner stores. You could go in there. I remember back in New York, you could go in there and watch the tracks in California run. So they've been ahead of that curve. But is that good for the sport? To more people get involved with the sport? And in today's time, in Jody's and my world, it's a streaming component. And even in today's sports world, because ESPN is pushing streaming access, and I actually use it as an individual. I pay for their premium subscription because the sports things that I want to watch when I want to watch it, they got it. So I go get it, and I would tell you it's cheap. It's very affordable. It's cheaper than going to it in person. So is that good for the horses? Is that good for horse racing, bad for horse racing? Yes, it's a different function. Being at any event live is very different than watching it broadcast. That's true. But the consumer knows all of that, right? So that it's not like some smokescreen.
Yeah, but I think it's I think it's a necessity. I think you have to do this. If you don't, you're gonna really you're going to limit your space and your audience substantially. It does bring a lot more visibility to the different racetracks. It could definitely help with regard to handle. I think a lot of the handle is now coming from internet, and most of your wagering is probably not done on track. I think those days are long behind us. So I think for the business to survive, it's a necessity. But I also do think that having access to races through the various streaming services is a reasonable alternative if you're unable to make it down to the racetrack yourself. And for me, I've got, there I am at the racetrack. For me,
yeah. Well,
I've got horses.
The track, so I had to bring it up.
I've got horses in different places. I've got horses on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and I just can't get on the plane every time the horse is going to be entered. So for me, it's great being able to watch one of my horses race on a simulcast when I'm not able to be there. So yeah, I think it's net good for the industry overall. And maybe we can get more eyeballs on it too with more streaming services. If we can interact with the races too, whether you're wagering or just picking the winners, that's always something people like to do. You get two people or more in a room, and you're going to be making, whether it's fun wagers or real wagers, you're going to be betting on who's going to win that race. So,
for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a net positive overall though.
Victor, do the tracks today, because it's been so long since I've been to one, I mean, we may head into Oklahoma City to watch horses run at Remington or something like that, but do the tracks have a meet and greet day where people can come in off the street and pet a horse and meet a jockey, and do they do any of that, or is that something that doesn't happen? You just go watch the race.
I don't really see too much of that as much. I'm trying to think if there's been a meet and greet. Not really. Each of the tracks does have a club similar to like the myracing.com, but not quite as big. It's like $500 versus maybe $250. And for those clubs, like Emerald Down has an Emerald Down Racing Club. For those clubs, they'll do exactly what you're talking about. You can come in, they'll have events, you can meet the trainer, they'll have a paddock session, they'll do a tram tour of the backstretch. You get to meet, some of the personalities on the racetrack. To an extent, yes, I think that's available for folks. You're seeing other promotions as well. The tracks are starting to get creative with some of their promotion activities. I'll use Emerald Downs again as an example since I'm local for Emerald Downs, but they have what's called a grandparents race, and they put grandparents in the starting gate and have them run 100 yards and, have the winner. And that's actually on YouTube. You could probably look that up on YouTube and watch that. They have a T-Rex race where they've got these, giant Tyrannosaurus Rex costumes, and they do the same thing. They did a camel race as well. So they do some, and then they have the corgi races as well every year. So they bring in a lot of spectators for those type of events. They have Indian relay races. They do different types of events on different weekends, and that tends to actually bring in more folks to the live racing. And they've done a pretty good job of actually in Washington of bringing people to the racetrack. But other areas, I don't know how active their promotion departments are. I think if you do more of that, though, you'll attract more spectators to the game.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said, any opportunity that you can give a person to have that same, I talked to Brian about this, and we talked about the intercollegiate deal, and the girls that I go coach at Oklahoma State University. I said, every little girl that's from 6 to 10 years old that maybe thinks that she wants to go on a scholarship, we should have the opportunity to come and meet and pet a horse, something that ignites that same passion that you found, all by yourself. They just need help. I mean, kids love horses. Girls love horses. Good Lord. They just,
yes, they do.
Yeah. So it's like, they just need to be steered in the right direction, I think. So instead of going to find that bus that you guys had to without mom and dad knowing this, there just needs to be a way that a parent can take a kid and say, here, let's go. I think it would be fun.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
Well, I would tell you that's organized activity at the venue level, because it doesn't matter if it's a track or a horse arena or a sporting arena or any of those things. That's where it is. And so our show producers, our show management, we've got to think differently, because the experience in person is dynamic. And do we need more people to always be there in person at horse events? My answer would be yes, all day. And then can you expand that audience for the peak of the competition? I find this fascinating when we talk about the Kentucky Derby. It's because they have a 4-hour broadcast for a 2.5-minute race. So, they're getting creative with doing that. Now, a lot of that is because they're competing for the attention of the sports audience on broadcast. Got it. But the fact that they've been able to do it, take a 2-minute race and turn it into a 4-hour show, that's like pretty impressive.
Yeah,
so I think we could be doing some of that. I'm not talking about the broadcast because I think that stuff speaks for itself. It's how do we get creative in two different spaces? One, at the venue, so the experience of being in person stays dynamic and stays extremely positive. And the second is the quality of the program that's going out across the internet.
I was going to say to that point too, that venues at the NBC, I think they're the ones that carry the Kentucky Derby. They do a really nice job of building up to the race, and they introduce, so you know nothing about who's entered in the race at all, but they do a lot of this drama in terms of just getting you interested in the different horses and the backstory, and they kind of build up that sort of competition that's going to happen when the race actually then does happen, so that by the time they actually break from the gate, you've probably formed some opinion on who you want to see win the race just because of what they showed you in the 3 or 4 hours leading up to that. And if we can create that sort of drama, so to speak, regardless of what the race is, whether it's a local race or something, two individuals that are at the top of the class and they're gonna end up competing against each other. As long as you can kind of build that drama and provide a little bit of those backstories, you can perhaps recreate some of that interest for viewers that may not be as familiar with the event or the sport.
Really good stuff.
Well, Victor, tell us what do you want to leave folks with regarding your book and the story? What is the most powerful piece? They all need to get it. We'll put the links on where your website. They can order it on Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. It's a great read. But tell us, what's the most powerful piece you want to leave the reader with?
I would say definitely buy the book for sure.
Yeah.
And I think for me, just get yourself really deep into the story, relate to the different characters, understand the different personalities that exist, put yourself on the backstretch, put yourself sort of in the head of the protagonist and kind of ride with him, so to speak, through the journey that he goes through, because he does also go through this evolution to a large extent with regard to, starting out as a bookie and as a handicapper. And then he starts to kind of get that bug with regard to his sort of feel and passion for the horse itself. So, kind of go on that journey with our protagonist and just, get deep into the story and enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, like I said, it's a work of fiction, but there is a lot of fact woven into this book. So, like I said, I can't recommend it enough, especially if someone hasn't experienced the horse race before, backside of the track. Read the book. It'll give you a great feel, and it'll make you feel good.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Victor, we can't thank you enough for sharing your book, your story. We love the conversation. This is very personal for me. Horses are good for people. There's no doubt about that. And our people are good for horses as well. We've certainly made their life much, much better in today's time than it ever would have been if they were still out on the range. So we appreciate it. Your story's fantastic. Your passion for the horses is outstanding. We will put the links in accordingly so that people can get to it. It'll be down below. You can purchase it at Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com. You can visit Victor's website at VictorBahna.com. All of that will be included. And we can't thank you enough, Victor. So we appreciate it. Don't forget.
Thank you. Yeah. So appreciative of you having me on your show. It's been great to chat with you. And I really enjoyed our discussions as well. I love your passion for the horses and what you're trying to do for the business too. So, keep doing what you're doing and let's fight the good fight here.
We'll do that. Victor, thank you so very much. Brian, I can never tell. I mean, I don't even know how I found you actually. I mean, he gets on the internet and and all of a sudden it's like, hey, I got this guy. He's going to make a great story. It's like, okay, And you know what? It's fantastic. I don't know where I mean, he's everywhere, right? I mean, that computer never, I don't think it ever shuts off with that guy. But anyway, so very nice to have met you. And I want to meet you in person. Hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do that at a racetrack somewhere. But thank
I'd
you
love
so
to do
much.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. By all means, let me know, and I'll try to meet you up somewhere.
Okay, perfect. Well,
And
gentlemen,
I'll
until the next time.
I'll try to get out to I'd like to get to one of your events. I think it's OKC is where you have your
Absolutely.
We have several of them, and we've got a mix. There's a dozen plus 15 we call them major events here in Scottsdale, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Columbus, Ohio. They're in Central Florida, so they're around. So could we coordinate any one of combining, whether it's at a track and or one of our major events? We'd love it, Victor.
I'm all up for that. So yeah, it sounds like a plan for me. Let's put something together.
Okay.
Well,
until next time.
I need your lead on those events though, and we'll figure one out.
Yep, we'll do it. Until next time, enjoy the ride.
Stay in the middle. See you guys. Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by 4D Productions in cooperation with the Consultment Agency, a full-service agency that helps bring forward-thinking equine brands into the 21st century using digital skills and services such as website development, graphic design, social media, and media production such as the podcast you're consuming here today.